when a 60-year-old man served a plate of food to a stranded Hell's Angel during a fierce snowstorm. He had no idea he was about to witness something that would change his life forever, because the next morning, 200 thundering motorcycles lined up outside his humble mountain home like an army of chrome and leather. What these feared bikers did next left the entire mountain town speechless and proved that sometimes the most unlikely people become your greatest allies. But what could one simple act of sharing food possibly do to command the respect and loyalty of an entire Hell's Angels chapter? The wind screams through the towering pines like the voices of lost souls, driving snow so thick and fast that the world beyond the frost-covered windows of Frank Murphy's mountain home disappears into a wall of white that seems to swallow everything whole, and inside the weathered timber sanctuary that his father built with hand-hewn logs and honest sweat, back when this stretch of Colorado mountain road was nothing but a logging trail, 60-year-old Frank Murphy stirs a pot of beef stew that's been simmering on the old cast-iron stove since the storm began 3 hours ago. The oil flame glow casts dancing shadows across the bare pine walls, where photographs of 3 generations of Murphy men hang like silent witnesses to the countless souls who found refuge in this place, their faces telling stories of gratitude and unexpected kindness, while the wood-burning stove crackles with a rhythm that matches Frank's heartbeat, steady, reliable, unchanged by the chaos raging outside, where the temperature has dropped to 20 below, and the wind chill could freeze a man's soul solid in minutes. Frank runs his weathered fingers along the worn kitchen table that his grandfather built, its pine surface smooth from 60 years of family meals and conversations, listening to the blizzard's fury while he checks the pot of stew one more time, adding a pinch of salt and thinking about his Mary, gone these past 2 years, but still present in every recipe, every gesture of hospitality, every moment when he chooses kindness over caution, because she taught him that a man's character is measured not by what he fears, but by what he's willing to give. When giving costs him something, the heavy oak door suddenly crashes open with such violence that the oil flames flicker and dance, and there in the doorway stands a figure from another world, entirely a mountain of a man wrapped in black leather and chains, snow clinging to his beard like silver frost, his massive frame filling the entrance as wind and snow swirl around him like he's conjured the storm itself from the depths of hell. Jesus Christ, it's colder than a witch's grave out there, the stranger says, stamping boots the size of dinner plates on the wide plank floor while shaking snow from a leather vest that bears the unmistakable wings and skull of the Hell's Angels. And Frank feels his pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the same instinct that made him pull over for stranded motorists and take in stray dogs, the recognition that every soul deserves shelter from the storm. The biker's eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, scan the rustic interior with the careful attention of someone who's learned to read danger in shadows and salvation in unexpected places. And when those eyes meet Frank's across the kitchen, something passes between them that has nothing to do with leather and everything to do with the shared understanding of men who've weathered their own tempests and lived to tell about it. "Got any food that might thaw a man from the inside out?" the stranger asks, his voice carrying the gravel of too many cigarettes and too many miles of highway, but also a politeness that surprises Frank, who spent enough years reading people to know the difference between genuine courtesy and the calculated charm of someone working an angle. Frank gestures toward the wooden chair beside the stone fireplace, already ladling stew into a ceramic bowl that Mary painted with wildflowers during one of those peaceful evenings when the world seemed manageable and love felt permanent. And as he places the steaming bowl on the kitchen table, he watches the biker's massive hands, scarred and calloused from honest work, adorned with rings that tell stories of brotherhood and loss, accept the offering with the careful reverence of someone who knows the true value of unexpected kindness. "Name's Diesel," the biker says, wrapping those battle-scarred mitts around the bowl like it's a sacred chalice. Steam, rising from the stew to fog the frost on his beard, while his eyes close, in the kind of gratitude that speaks louder than any prayer. And Frank introduces himself with the simple dignity of a man who's never needed more than his given name and his reputation for fair dealing in a world that's grown complicated and cold. The storm outside intensifies, until the windows rattle in their frames like chattering teeth, and in the flickering illumination, these two men from different worlds begin to share the kind of stories that only emerge in the deep hours of winter nights, when the ordinary rules of social distance melt away like snow on warm ground. Diesel talks about riding with his brothers through 23 states, about the military service that taught him the meaning of fraternity, and the divorce that taught him the meaning of loss, about how the patch on his vest represents not the violence that outsiders see, but the sacred promise that no member rides alone, no matter how dark the road or fierce the storm, while Frank shares memories of teaching high school history until retirement brought him back to this mountain home where 3 generations of Murphy men have lived, of Mary's battle with cancer, and the way she made him promise to keep helping people, because kindness to strangers is what makes us human in a world that's grown cold. The timber walls seem to lean closer as their conversation deepens, creating an intimacy that transforms the rustic home into a confessional, where the usual boundaries between stranger and friend dissolve like salt in warm broth. "Lost my dad when I was 16, Diesel says, staring into the stew as if the vegetables might rearrange themselves into answers to questions he's carried for 30 years. Never had a chance to learn the things fathers teach sons about being a man in a world that doesn't give a damn about honor or keeping your word. Frank refills the bowl without being asked, understanding that some hungers run deeper than the physical, that some storms require more than shelter and food. They require the kind of listening that validates a man's existence and makes him feel less alone in a universe that often seems indifferent to human suffering. The older man leans back in his chair, studying Diesel's weathered face in the flickering light, seeing not the leather-clad stranger who crashed through his door, but a son who never got the chance to learn from his father's wisdom. "My old man taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns or how loud he can roar," Frank says quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in classrooms full of young men searching for direction, but by what he does when nobody's watching, and how he treats folks who can't do nothing for him in return. He gestures toward the photographs on the wall. 3 generations of Murphy men who carved their lives from these unforgiving mountains with nothing but determination and an unshakable belief that hard work and honest dealing would see them through whatever storms came their way. Diesel follows his gaze to the old photographs, studying the faces of men who shared Frank's steady eyes and calloused hands, men who understood that strength came not from intimidation, but from the quiet confidence of knowing you'd done right by your family and your community. "What would your father have said about letting a Hell's Angel into his house?" Diesel asks with a wry smile that doesn't quite hide the genuine curiosity in his voice. Because in all his years of riding the highways and sleeping under strange skies, he's learned to recognize the rare souls who see past appearances to the heart beneath. Frank chuckles, a sound like wind through pine boughs, warm and reassuring in the storm-wrapped silence of his kitchen. He'd have said the same thing his daddy told him when he was young, that the good Lord sends folks into our lives for reasons we might not understand at first, and our job isn't to judge, but to listen for what they might need from us. The old teacher's eyes grow distant as he remembers his father's voice, rough from years of breathing sawdust and mountain air, always ready with a story or a lesson that somehow fit whatever situation life threw at them. He used to say that every stranger carries a story worth hearing, and every story carries a lesson worth learning, if we're wise enough to pay attention. The conversation flows like whiskey, warm and golden, as these two men from different worlds discover the common ground of loss and resilience, of fathers who died too soon, and mothers who held families together with nothing but love and determination. Diesel talks about the garage he runs in Denver, how he learned to fix motorcycles the hard way after his own bike broke down 300 miles from nowhere, and how the Brotherhood found him when he was at his lowest point, giving him purpose and family when the world seemed determined to grind him down. Murphy shares stories of students who reminded him why teaching mattered. Young people who walked into his classroom carrying the weight of broken homes and impossible dreams, and how Mary would invite the struggling ones for Sunday dinner, feeding their bodies and souls with equal generosity. From its perch on the kitchen shelf, an old CB radio suddenly crackles to life, voices cutting through the static like distant signals from another dimension. And Diesel's head snaps up with the alertness of a wolf hearing his pack's call. "Road dog to Diesel, come in, brother." The voice says, rough with concern and kinship, "Storm's got half the chapter stranded between here and Denver, but we heard you made it to that mountain house. How, copy?" Diesel reaches for the microphone with fingers that suddenly seem gentle as a child's, keying the radio and speaking into the crackling silence. "Copy that. Road dog and brothers. You need to know something. There's still good people in this world, and I'm sitting with one right now, who opened his home and served me a meal that would make your mama weep with pride." The radio explodes with voices as word spreads through the network of bikers scattered across the storm-locked highways. Stories of Frank's kindness traveling from bike to bike like wildfire, through dry timber. And the older man watches Diesel's face transform with the fierce pride of someone who's found treasure in an unexpected place and wants to share the discovery with his tribe. "Frank," Diesel says, setting down the microphone and meeting the older man's eyes with an intensity that carries the weight of unspoken promises, "my family is going to want to meet the man who proved that angels don't always wear white robes. Some wear flannel shirts and serve stew that tastes like redemption." Outside, the storm begins to show signs of weakening. The winds howl, softening to a whisper, and through the frost-covered windows, the first faint hint of dawn touches the winter-wrapped peaks with fingers of gold and rose, promising that even the fiercest storms eventually pass and reveal the transformed landscape they leave behind. As dawn breaks over the mountains, a distant rumble cuts through the morning stillness, beneath the settling snow, like distant thunder through winter air. But it grows steadily into something that makes the thick log walls vibrate and the dishes rattle on their shelves, and when the homeowner peers through the frost-etched window, his breath fogs the glass as he witnesses something that seems torn from the pages of an impossible dream. An endless river of chrome and steel flowing up the mountain road like mechanical cavalry emerging from the white wilderness itself. Diesel grins with the fierce pride of a man watching his family arrive for Sunday dinner, stepping onto the covered porch where icicles hang like crystal daggers, while calling back through the open door, "Frank, you better put on another pot of coffee and set out every plate you've got, because it looks like the entire Colorado chapter heard about your hospitality on the CB network, and they've come to pay their respects to a mountain man who understands the meaning of fraternity." What follows transforms Frank's quiet sanctuary into something that defies every stereotype and shatters every assumption about black-clad riders, as nearly 200 Harley-Davidsons arrange themselves across Frank's property and along the mountain road with the precision of a military formation, their riders dismounting with a reverence that speaks of something deeper than mere gratitude. This is pilgrimage, pure and simple, and Frank Murphy has somehow become their unlikely shrine. The president of the chapter, a silver-bearded giant whose arms tell stories in ink and scars, approaches Frank in his own kitchen with the slow, measured steps of someone who understands the weight of ceremony. And when he removes his leather gloves to shake Frank's work-worn fingers, the gesture carries the gravity of treaties signed between nations and promises made before God. "Brother Diesel radioed ahead about what you did last night," the man says, his voice carrying the authority of wind through canyon walls. "And where we come from? A man who opens his home to a stranger in a storm, without asking questions or expecting payment, becomes family. No conditions, no time limits, just the understanding that blood isn't the only thing that makes brothers. Frank's home fills with the sound of boots on pine floors, and voices that carry the rough affection of men who've chosen each other as family. And Murphy watches in amazement as these feared riders move respectfully through his personal space, accepting coffee from Frank's personal mugs while sharing stories of charity rides and toy drives, of blood donations and hospital visits, of men who found purpose in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The transformation is nothing short of miraculous as Frank's small world expands to accommodate this unlikely congregation, watching these vest-wearing giants move through his home with surprising gentleness, careful not to damage the family photographs on the walls or disturb the golden lantern light that has glowed here for 60 years. Their conversations, revealing not the violent criminals that society expects, but fathers worried about daughters, veterans carrying invisible wounds, mechanics who fix broken things because they understand what it means to be broken themselves. One writer, tears freezing on his cheeks in the bitter air, tells Frank about losing his son in Afghanistan, and how the fellowship filled the void that threatened to swallow him whole, while another shares photos of grandchildren he's putting through college, with money earned from the garage he built with his own hands, and the loyalty of customers who trust him because his word is his bond. The snow continues to fall as the morning deepens, each flake catching the warm light from the windows and creating a cathedral of white silence that seems to bless this gathering of unlikely souls. And the homeowner realizes that he's witnessing something that will echo through these mountains long after the last motorcycle has disappeared into the crystal landscape, the birth of a legend, the kind of story that gets passed down through generations, because it proves that miracles still happen when human hearts choose connection over fear, kindness over suspicion, love over the artificial boundaries that divide us into tribes that never have to meet. The president of the chapter reaches into his leather vest with the solemnity of a priest handling sacred relics, producing a patch hand-stitched with golden thread that catches the lamplight like captured sunshine, and as he places it on Frank's kitchen table between them, Murphy sees that the design isn't the intimidating skull and wings he expected, but something far more precious, a mountain peak surrounded by the simple words, "Mountain Brother," in letters that seem to glow with their own inner light. This patch has never been given to anyone outside the fellowship, the silver-bearded man explains, his voice thick with emotion that speaks of traditions older than law and deeper than blood. But last night, when you opened your door to Diesel without knowing who he was or what he represented, you proved that family isn't always born. Sometimes it's forged in moments of pure human kindness that remind us why we fight so hard to protect what matters. The ceremony that follows feels both ancient and immediate, as every rider in Frank's home raises their coffee mugs in a toast that transforms his humble kitchen into a chapel of communion, their voices joining in a rumble that shakes the timber walls, not with violence, but with the power of recognition, of seeing their own values reflected in an unlikely mirror, and finding themselves worthy of the reflection. The retired teacher accepts the patch, with hands that tremble not from cold, but from the weight of understanding that his simple act of hospitality has created ripples that will spread far beyond these white-draped mountains, touching lives and changing stories in ways he may never fully comprehend, but will carry in his heart like a sacred flame that no winter's fury can extinguish. As the sun climbs higher through the crystal air, painting the world in shades of gold and silver that make the frost-covered pines look like a fairy tale illustration, the bikers begin their exodus with the same reverence they showed in arriving, each man stopping to shake Frank's hand or offer a quiet word of gratitude that carries the weight of genuine kinship. The engines fire to life in a symphony that echoes through the mountain valleys, like the sound of freedom itself, and the homeowner watches from his covered porch, as the great procession winds down the snowy mountain road, their taillights fading like red stars, until only the tracks in the snow remain as evidence of this miraculous visitation. The house falls quiet, except for the crackling of logs in the wood-burning stove and the gentle whisper of settling snow against the windows. But the silence feels different now. Not the loneliness of an old man isolated by winter, but the peaceful contentment of someone who has touched the infinite and been touched by it in return. Murphy runs his fingers over the leather patch that now adorns his flannel shirt, feeling the careful stitches that represent hours of devoted work by souls that chose to create beauty instead of destruction, fellowship instead of isolation, hope instead of the despair that comes so easily in a world grown cold and distant. In the days and weeks that follow, word of the gathering spreads through the mountain communities like wildfire through dry timber, bringing visitors from hundreds of miles away who want to see the home where angels wore leather and miracles tasted like beef stew. But Murphy treats each newcomer with the same quiet dignity and genuine hospitality that started it all, understanding now that his calling isn't just to live peacefully in retirement, but to serve as living proof that kindness is contagious, that love multiplies when shared, and that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin not with violence, but with the simple act of one human being treating another as family. No questions asked, no conditions attached, just the ancient understanding that we are all travelers in the storm, and the light we share today might be the beacon that guides someone else safely home tomorrow.